friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Learning for Good. I am so excited to have a guest again on this week's episode. We have been talking about all things connection in the virtual room this month. So over the course of the month, we've talked about how nonprofits can build trust among their hybrid workforce. We've talked about the 3 must-haves in any virtual training, and we even talked about one simple but effective virtual learning activity. So if you have created virtual training or you are creating virtual training, today's episode is for you. I have a very special guest. Melissa Dinwiddie is here with me today, and she's going to share how you could never have a boring virtual training again. And that's what we all want. Melissa uses her fun method to create active learning opportunities to increase memory retention, creativity and innovation, and connection and cohesion among learners. So let's dive into today's episode. It's Learning for Good. Melissa, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited that you're here with us today to talk about connection in the virtual room and what we can do to create more engaging virtual training. So before we jump in, because I know you have tons of advice to share, tell us a little bit about your career journey and maybe one of the most unique virtual experiences you've ever created.
Let's see, unique virtual experiences. Well, let me think. Well, my career journey has been very different. I actually have an art background. I don't come from the corporate world at all. I used to be an artist and calligrapher. I made my living making custom artworks for a long time, a lot of Jewish marriage contracts, actually. And there's a traditional piece of art that is a part of every Jewish wedding ceremony. In its most traditional form, it's actually a prenuptial agreement. And I did a lot of those by hand, and then I designed a line of prints. Anyway, I got very creatively stuck as a professional artist making art on commissions because I felt like every piece of art I made had to make money. And so back in 2010, I was so burned out and decided finally that I had to get back to making art for myself and started a blog. And that took me down this road of becoming an online business person, basically. And I ended up becoming a creativity instigator. I figured out how to get creatively unstuck. I developed a series of tools for myself. I call them little rules in order to help myself get creatively unstuck. And over the years, those little rules evolved into 10 that became the guideposts of my book, The Creative Sandbox Way. I ran creativity retreats, and I had this online business, and realized that where I really felt like I was in my zone was leading these creativity retreats. And I thought, I love working with groups and teams and helping them really shine and step into a larger vision for themselves. Where can I do this most effectively? And I thought, with businesses. So that's where I pivoted and started my consultancy, the Creative Sandbox Solutions. And then the pandemic happened. And I looked around and I thought, a lot of people are really struggling on Zoom and how to work virtually. And they're trying to cram these in-person meetings into virtual platforms, and it's not working. And this is something that I can help with. I have a lot of experience in improv, and I'm working with I'm part of a community of people who use improv in an applied way. And all those folks were getting together and saying, oh my God, here's this pandemic. We're stuck on Zoom. What can we do? What works in this virtual platform? And so I was curating and collecting all these ideas. And so I started leading workshops to teach people what I had curated together, how to lead non-boring virtual meetings. And that's what led to companies coming to me and saying, hey, can you help us? So some of the most unique or fun virtual experiences that I've led, recently I got to work with some managers at Google who just needed a recess. And the person who hired me wanted to accomplish two things. One, to basically give them a gift, give them just some playtime, and also to show them, to open their eyes, to show them that meetings, that getting together in it wasn't Zoom, it was actually Google Meet, because it's Google, right? Wanted to show them that there are other ways of gathering, that there's other ways of doing things, that, like, oh my gosh, we don't just have to sit here and do the normal sort of boring ways of getting together. So that was really fun. It was just really like 25 minutes. So that was one. I've also, when we were limited during the pandemic and I couldn't lead my creativity retreats in person, I led maybe 4 or 5 or 6, I can't remember how many, virtual creativity retreats where I gathered people together. In my in-person retreats, I run what I call creative catalyzing sessions for the half an hour after breakfast to get people out of their heads, into their bodies. So the gremlins that are, telling you you're not good enough, you shouldn't be doing this, or, you're too fat, whatever, the nasty things that those inner critic voices tell you, they live in your head. And so when we can get into our bodies and out of our heads, then we can actually let our creativity flow. So I lead these creative catalyzing sessions for a half an hour after breakfast. So I basically did the equivalent online to get people laughing and moving our bodies. And so we could just send those gremlins off to get a pedicure so we could get down to creating. And then we would spend a couple of hours or 3 hours doing whatever creative work people wanted to work on, whether it's drawing or painting or mosaics or writing or whatever it might be. So I did a number of those. Those were super fun. I did something really equivalent with a group of millennials at a synagogue who wanted a creative play day, and got them together for 90 minutes to essentially play on Zoom. And so those, like the ones that I've mentioned, those are the most fun for me when I get people together for pure play experiences.
Yeah, I love that. So I started working in virtual training before the pandemic. So it's, it was pre-pandemic days, right? And I remember when we first started dabbling in virtual training at the organization I was with, there was some question about whether people could actually build relationships in a virtual space. And my boss at the time said, people meet and get married all the time online, right? And eventually, yes, they meet in person and, they get to know each other that way. But that relationship starts online. So if people can do that, we can create a virtual training where people can build relationships with each other. So I love everything that you've shared, because that kind of play base, that recess, all of those concepts really do help build those relationships and get people started for that creativity and connection that you've mentioned as well. So thank you for sharing that. Lots of good stuff just in your career journey and the experiences that you've created. So how did you end up with your business, Creative Sandbox Solutions? So you talked a little bit about being burned out as an artist and starting the blog, and then pivoting a little bit into, a lot, I don't know, pivoting into the business world for meetings. But talk to me a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
It's been really interesting, and I have to say it's been really challenging, because coming from the world of being an artist and then transitioning into the world of working with these, people from big businesses, I've faced a lot of imposter complex. Feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't have experience in, in the corporate world. Who am I to, blah, 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 blah. And I've had to have reflected back to me that it's actually my, my creative journey, the fact that I don't come from a corporate trajectory, that's my strength, because I'm able to bring a creative perspective to what I'm doing. People are not hiring me for, to bring to them what they know. They're hiring me to bring to them what they don't know. I have expertise that they don't have, and that's what they're hiring me for. And so that's been quite a journey for me to really claim that and own that. It's been really interesting and really challenging. And also because I come from a completely different world, my network was completely different. So I've had to learn the skills of, sales and marketing. And I learned the skills of sales and marketing when I had the online business. I had to learn those skills of building an online business and selling and marketing to people who were interested in what I had to sell directly to them as B2C consumers, right? And then switching over to selling into big companies is a completely different skill set. So I invested in a lot of training in order to learn how to do that kind of selling. It's completely different. It's like night and day. It's like learning to speak Greek. I learned how to speak Greek. And then suddenly I had to learn how to speak, Chinese. Completely and utterly different. So it's been an ongoing, challenging, exciting, and challenging journey.
Yeah. And I can imagine, you said that businesses are coming to you because your background is different, right? So I can imagine that that is a strength that you bring to any potential business relationship. You're not going to give them more of the same. You're not going to go down the road that they've already been down before, right? It's going to be something different, something creative, something that they've never experienced. And that's what people want and a lot of times need in this virtual space, so that we don't end up with kind of another boring virtual webinar where we're falling asleep listening to a talking head, right? So I love that you shared that. I also love that you sought out training as a training person, right? I'm a little bit biased. But training can be a very good thing. It's not always the answer. It's not always the only answer, but it can be an answer. So I love that you had that kind of pull learning opportunity to be able to go out and find the training that you needed to help you sell into businesses. So transitioning a little bit then to, I create training. I know you do a lot of meetings and some training and things as well. How do you create those engaging virtual experiences? Where do you start?
Yes. Well, first of all, I have conversations with my client to figure out what they're looking at, what they're looking for, who the audience is, what is the current state, and what's the end state that they're looking for. So I'm creating a journey arc, and I'm looking at it as just like, a story, a play, a movie has an arc to it. That's what I'm creating with whatever the experience is that I'm designing. So it's going to have a peak to it, some kind of a pinnacle, a peak. It's going to build to a peak moment, and then it's going to have a falling off to it, just like any good story, right? Or like a roller coaster, something like that. So that's what I'm building. I'm taking people from point A to point B. So I have to have that conversation with the client that I'm working with to really understand the audience and what their needs are and what I'm creating. Then what I do is I use experiences in order to create those changes that we're going for. So I'm not lecturing, I'm not creating some kind of a slide lecture or something like that. In fact, I do use slides, but usually they're more like this kind of a thing where I'm, doing an overlay on my camera rather than, doing a screen share where I'm just like lecturing at people. And this is where my fun method comes in. So fun, it's an acronym. So it stands for, F stands for find the flow. So I bring in some kind of a short, engaging activity that gets people into some kind of a flow state. Usually emotions are involved. And often that activity doesn't have anything to do with the theme or the topic, but it just gets people really engaged. And it might only take 2 minutes to do that activity. And that's the F. Then U stands for unlock the meaning. We come back together and we have a debrief discussion. And this is where the gold is. And you as a trainer, I know you understand this really, really well. This is where people connect the dots as to where the activity, what that has to do with their day-to-day work life or with the theme, the topic. And this is where they have that light bulb moment, that aha moment, that little ding, and you can see the light go off in their eyes. And what that connection is for each person might be different. And they get to determine the meaning for themselves. This is so powerful and so sticky. And this is why this kind of learning is so powerful, because they determine the learning for themselves rather than having it just like lectured at them. Then N stands for name the change, or another N is also now what? At the end of each session, each person identifies their biggest takeaway, their biggest insight, and how they're going to implement that over the course of the time between now and the next time we meet. The sessions that I designed are typically, well, at least when I'm thinking of my Communicating for Influence program that I designed, which is multiple shorter sessions, because in virtual it doesn't work very well to have like a day-long thing like we would do in person typically, gather people together for a full day offsite or something. Doesn't work very well on virtual. So I designed things with shorter sessions with like a week in between typically. And so that gives people time to implement and really like use the muscles, really, activate those muscles that they've identified during the time that we've had together. And then when we regather the next time, we get to report back and, how did that go? What happened with that experiment that you tried? And then hearing everybody's experiments really deepens the learning. So that's how the fun method works. So did I answer your question or did I go off on a tangent?
No, you did. That was perfect. And I love this. I feel like we're very much in sync. I don't use the fun method. Obviously, that's your proprietary method. But I say that my work is strategic and compassionately human-centered. And so when I work with a client, I'm also meeting with them to figure out what is the transformation? What is that end goal? And so we're creating something to help them go from point A to point B. And then when I think about the actual learning experience, I tend to give learners a lot of credit because we all have so many different life experiences, work experiences, expertise, things that we're bringing with us to that learning experience. So instead of lecturing, I do a lot of discovery, allowing the learner to discover what it is that at the end of the day, we really want them to learn, right? And so they're discovering it kind of on their own with some prompts, with some guidance, with some conversation, but they're discovering it for themselves. They own that learning when that happens. Yeah. And so I love that that's how the approach that you're taking with your fun method. And then, towards the end, you're thinking about, okay, what's your aha moment? What are you taking away? How are you going to apply this? You're giving them the chance to apply and then come back and reflect on how that went. That is perfection when it comes to learning. That's how you create real transformational learning. So thank you for sharing your method with us. It's just, it's amazing when we're so connected in so many ways in this work, despite having very different backgrounds, right? Like you're coming at this from an artist perspective, you're thinking about it as a story. I've never thought about my training as a story, right? And so you're coming at it from a completely different way. You're creating that engaging experience for people so that they can have that transformation that you're looking for. So I love that. Thank you for sharing all about your fun method. And I am quite sure if you use the fun method, you will never have another boring virtual training again, right? Now, one last thing, and this is something that's really important to me and a lot of my clients, is that relationship piece. So how do you, in a virtual setting, maybe it's in a more formalized thing like you were just talking about, maybe it's in the play or the recess that you talked about earlier, but how do you form or facilitate that relationship building process in the virtual environment?
Yeah. So connection is really the name of the game when, when you're doing, any kind of gathering. It's called a meeting for a reason, right? We don't call it a watching. We call it a meeting. So if you're going to bring people together, then it needs to be about the connection. Peter Block said connection before content. So we need to really make sure that we're connecting people right off the bat. So I always make sure that as people are landing in the room, I engage people in what I call an unofficial start. I didn't invent this term, but I've got several different unofficial start ideas. So there are more than 8, but here are 8 unofficial start ideas that I like to use. So one is simply to ask a curious question in the chat. What did you do this weekend? Go ahead and share it in the chat. Or what are your plans for this weekend? Anything that gets people just sharing and looking at what other people are doing. If it's a small enough group, then you can do that verbally, right? Orally. Name that tune. Cue up a playlist of music from TV shows and movies and have those playing one at a time, and have people, get your typing fingers ready. And here's a song, and go ahead and guess what the movie is or the TV show is. And that's a really fun one to get people going. Word clouds is always a fun one. Here's an example of a word cloud. This is just to get people interacting right off the bat so that they get the sense you're planting the seed that this is an interactive experience, right? Trivia is a good one. You can always look up trivia on Google. Just get some trivia questions to get people interacting and engaging. People love polls. They're not, polls are not the most innovative or exciting necessarily, but people do tend to like to respond to polls. The name game, Zoom has this wonderful rename feature. If people know how to use it, get people to rename themselves as, whatever you want. What's the first word? Rename yourself as the first word that comes to mind when I say pickle. Everybody in the room renames themselves. It's a neat little team building activity because you can get a sense of who somebody is by how they rename themselves with random words. Then guess what? At the end of your meeting, bring that back again. Now rename yourself with the first word that comes to mind when I say the word trust, or whatever the meeting happened to be about. It's a nice little end cap on your experience. Use the annotation tool to, where are you, or how are you feeling, or, whatever. You bring up an image and have people use the annotation tool. And then drawing. I love this one. Pull up a whiteboard and have people draw what they want to get out of the meeting today, and let them know that the drawing can be either representational or abstract. Very, very important, since most people are terrified of drawing and think themselves, drawing in public at least, and think, I'm not an artist, I can't draw. So let them know nobody can draw with a whiteboard annotation tool, but that can be a really fun one. So those are some activities that I like to do to get people interacting and engaging. Once you get people interacting and engaging right off the bat, then they're more likely to be willing to engage throughout the meeting. And then I like to have some kind of connection activity within the first ideally 10 minutes at the, no later than 10 minutes from the start. Some kind of a breakout room activity. If it's a small group, it can be a main room activity. One of my favorites is just grab an object, hold it up in front of the camera, show yourself if, I don't know, you like cats, you're a cat person, cover up your camera, show yourself if, and you can pass the ball around. I like to use take some air, squish it into a ball. I'm going to throw the ball to you, Heather. And now it's your turn. And now you're the one who says, show yourself if, and then just say something that's true for you. And what is lovely about this game is that it's people can determine the level of vulnerability that they want to share. So show yourself if, what's true for me today is I didn't get enough sleep or whatever, or I like the color blue. And then everybody who likes the color blue can show themselves. And that's not very revealing, but it tells you something about everybody in the room.
I love that. I think that's always a fear, right? People have a fear of what some people call icebreakers, or that kind of opening activity, because they don't necessarily want to share a lot about themselves right away. But to your point, that connection at the very beginning sets the tone for the whole meeting. So it's important. It's important to have that time, whatever you call it. It's important to have that time where people can connect with each other and they know who's in the space. A lot of times, what you're going to do for the rest of your time together is going to require that element of trust or that vulnerability, and that connection has to be in place for that to happen. And so I love that you're giving them the opportunity to share what feels comfortable for them in a way that's fun and engaging and allows them to participate no matter what their definition or comfort level with that participation.
Yeah.
So that's great. Is there anything else that you want to share with the Learning for Good audience?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's kind of a broad question, Heather.
It's okay if nothing comes to mind. I want to make sure. I know you are a wealth of knowledge and expertise. You've shared so much with us already here today, including how to walk away and never have another boring webinar again, or boring virtual training. And so I'm sure they've already taken a lot away from you. But if there's anything else that you want to share, feel free to do so.
Well, I share a lot on LinkedIn, so follow me there. And I also run monthly learning labs. So if people are interested, they can come to one of my monthly learning labs where I lead like 2 to 3 activities based around a theme every month. And those are really fun, and they're based on my fun method. So, yeah.
I love that people can experience what you would be creating for them or their organization or their team. So what a great opportunity. That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining me today on Learning for Good. You were a wonderful guest. You shared so much information, and I like that you brought in some of your activities as we were talking to, so people got a little demonstration, a little taste, right, of what that might be like, what your monthly learning labs might be like, and what your experiences are like as you create those. So thank you so much for joining today and sharing everything with us.
Thank you for having me, Heather. This has been so much fun.
That was so amazing to have Melissa on this week. We have so much to learn from each other, and it's one of the things I hope to bring to all of you, my Learning for Good listeners. So if you're ready to create engaging, custom training for your nonprofit, but are struggling with how to do it virtually, head over to my website and let's work together to develop the skills your people need so you can scale your mission and your impact, even in the virtual world we found ourselves in. Hope you have a great day.